Har alle funnet seg i plass?
Liv handler om øyeblikk. Øyeblikk som betyr noe. Når vi ser skjønnheten rundt oss, eller hører vakker musikk, får kysse ingen andre lik. Når vi kjenner varmen fra dem vi er glad i. Når vi samles om en felles sak.
We are not satisfied and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
Det da vi føler livet har mening. Men kan vi vite at det virkelig har det? At det ikke bare er en illusjon? Hva er sannheten om verden vi lever i? Finnes det i det hele tatt noe sannhet? Finnes det rett og galt? Godt og ondt? Sant og usant? Om det ikke gjør det, hva da? Hva er det da å kjempe for? Hva er det da å leve for? Hvem har svar?
Yes, great movie for a great short film. Welcome to Skeptic Week 2020. This event will be in English. I hope that's fine for everybody. Then you can nod your heads. Yeah. Come on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's good for our presenter today. So my name is Andreas, and this is Bergen. And now Bergen has some information for us.
Yeah, so the Skeptics Week is arranged by the Navigators and Lagen. So we work together because we like to discuss big questions in life. So what we hope to do with the Skeptics Week is this. We want to create an open and inspiring meeting place for the big questions in philosophy, faith, religion, and science. So we hope that you experience here, and also on campus if you have been, if you have done a questionnaire. So we hope that you experience that we want to learn about convictions and values and thoughts and concerns of our fellow students, and that we want to engage in deeper conversations about the big questions in life. So really, we hope that this is what you experience in this seminar and throughout the week.
Yes. So our presenter for today is from the US. He has a Bachelor in English Literature, Master in Philosophy, a Doctorate in Theology, Philosophy and Culture. He has also been the co-author of the book Reasons to Believe. He has also been part of the Navigators National Leadership Team for over 20 years. That's amazing. And fun fact about our presenter is that he likes to surf and ski. And his family also have a youth hostel in Skjolden in Norway. His children loves brunost and caviar. So let's give a warm welcome to our presenter for today, Darrell.
I'll just open this little PowerPoint here. Maybe you can see it on the screen. How's that? Let's see. Okay, well that's coming up. Ja, jeg skal prøve å snakke litt norsk med alle dere. Ja. Jeg er Darrell Dooyema. Jeg kommer fra USA, fra Colorado Springs. Jeg har 3 barn også, og bare en kone. So for you English speakers, I said I just had 1 wife and 3 kids. So one extra detail here to share with all of you. But thank you so much for welcoming me to come and talk with you. And I think this is actually an important theme for tonight. So I hope we can spend a little time afterwards to talk back and forth, maybe a few questions if you have some. That would be wonderful. So we'll see how this technology works. I've got all sorts of wires all over me. Have you seen this? I've got one here. That's quite something. But we have the topic tonight, is the Bible dangerous? kind of a strange question, isn't it? Is the Bible dangerous? Why would we have that kind of a topic for this kind of event? By the way, isn't it wonderful to have an event where you can come and talk about the big questions in a respectful environment? There's less and less environments like that in our world today. I know from my country there are very few. People are calling each other names and yelling at each other. But to have a respectful environment where we could talk about things and even disagree about things, that's wonderful. It's good to have that. So you have a real gift to have an event like this. So tonight, the topic is the Bible a dangerous thing? Do you know danger isn't always a bad thing? Isn't that true? We love things that are dangerous. I got a message from a friend of mine the other day. Is he here? Is she? I'm not here. I don't see him. And the message had a picture of him waxing his skis, and then he was cleaning his skis, and then he was turning on his avalanche beacon. So if avalanche covered him, they could find him, and he was so excited. I'm going skiing tomorrow on the Powder. And I was too. I thought, yes, it's exciting, but it's very dangerous. You could die in that kind of situation. But so danger is not always a bad thing. We love things that are dangerous. We're kind of attracted to things that are dangerous, actually. But we also have to take the requisite precautions. Isn't that true? So if you're going to go skiing where there's a lot of avalanches, you've got to have this beacon on and be ready. So you need to be a little bit careful when you approach things that are dangerous. The author C.S. Lewis says, a young man who wishes to remain an atheist cannot be too careful of his reading. So C.S. Lewis actually thought it was dangerous to read stories in books like the Bible because it may have something to do with your life. And it's dangerous in the way that it may actually make a change or require you to make some decisions about it. And actually I think the Bible is dangerous like that. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the assumptions about the Bible, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what the Bible actually says. One more thing about danger. I was talking today with Alice about, is it Alice?
Yes.
That's your English name, but
Yes.
can you say your Chinese name? I still can't say it.
Go Hui.
Go Hui. There we go. I tried. Go Hui. I can say Bing Jiling. That's ice cream in Chinese, but I can't say your name. But we were talking about one word in Chinese, and the word is crisis. Do you know that word? Kind of a scary thing, a crisis. Well, in Chinese characters, it's comprised of two pictures. One picture means danger. That's what we're talking about, danger. But the other picture, to make up the word crisis, is opportunity. Isn't that interesting? So you have danger and opportunity. That's what you have in a crisis. And actually, that's true of tonight, too. This may be an opportunity for you to encounter the Bible. This is a dangerous book in many ways. But maybe this is an opportunity for you. It's muligheten, right? That's one of my favorite Norwegian words, muligheten. It sounds good. So, is the Bible dangerous? I'm actually going to argue that it is dangerous, but it's not dangerous maybe in the way that you think. So, what is the assumption about the Bible? I think there are many assumptions that actually turn out to be wrong. Let's take a look at one. Here's a famous author here, Christopher Hitchens. And he writes in a book called God is Not Great. He writes this about religion. All religion is violent, irrational, intolerant, allied to racism, tribalism, bigotry, invested in ignorance, and hostile to free inquiry, contemptuous of women, and coercive towards children. Ouch. So is the Bible dangerous like that? Because actually Hitchens is particularly picking on Christianity in the Bible. Of course, he's also picking on other world religions. He doesn't like Islam, he doesn't like Buddhism. He's picking on most religions. He's an atheist. But is that the kind of danger that we have in the Bible? Is the Bible, for example, dangerous for human rights? That's what he's claiming, isn't it? That actually what it does is turn people into human rights abusers? But let me ask you to take one moment. Could you turn to someone next to you and answer this tough question? What makes human beings valuable? What gives us value so that we can have human rights? Just take 1 minute, turn to someone next to you, take a 1 minute conversation. I'll hear if you answer. short. The cat came to join us while you were discussing your It keeps coming in and out. I think it's entertaining. Don't know why. So, what did you say? What gives human... Oh, now the cat's behind them. Okay, well, we'll leave the cat alone. What gives human beings value? What were some things that you said? Can a few people just shout out a couple things for me? Oh, I thought you did. God. I think God gives people value. I agree with you. What else? Anything else come out of your conversation? What gives human beings value so that we can have human rights? Some other ideas?
Our rationality or...
Okay, maybe our consciousness, our thinking. Some other things? What gives us value? Yeah?
That we actually have a choice on how we are going to bring up our children.
Okay, good. Our free will, our freedom, right? We have a choice.
We're different than animals, and we can look at the past and see the future and think rational about it. Like,
good.
Give this or that.
Yeah, I think we know intrinsically there's something different about us. That's true. Something different about human beings. Anything else? Gives us value? Yeah?
I think that human itself is of value, has value.
Okay.
In itself. That is created no matter what. If you're handicapped or have struggles in life.
Yeah. Okay, good. I agree with you. But this is what's interesting for me. This is why I want to start with some of these assumptions about human rights. Because I would make the bold claim to you that without God, without an objective standard for morality, it's very difficult to arrive at some of these things. For example, that every human being is valuable, even if they're sick or disabled or different from me or younger or older or different race or different economic status or different religion. They believe something. They're still valuable. It's very difficult to arrive at that conclusion without God. I'll give you a few examples. This is a famous atheist ethicist. So ethics is the study of what's right and wrong, what we should do. But this is what he says about human beings. A week-old rational baby is not rational and not self-conscious being, and so there are many non-human animals whose rationality and self-consciousness, awareness, capacity, and so on would exceed that of a human baby as a week or a month old. Therefore, the life of a baby, a newborn baby, is of less value than the life of a pig, or a dog, or a chimpanzee, or a cat. There's the cat. So he made a decision. He made kind of, you could say, a random choice. What I choose gives human beings values as rationality and consciousness. Well, a baby is less rational than maybe an older cat or a dog or anything. That cat has no rationality. So babies don't have that much value then, he says. So he's judging value based on contribution. Well, that's interesting, an interesting idea, but it's a little bit scary, I think. Here's another one. Another attempt at getting some ethics from an atheist perspective. This is Richard Dawkins, famous atheist writer. He's an evolutionary biologist. The world has no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. So when it comes to asking, is it right for me to oppress another human? He would say, in an ultimate sense, no, that doesn't make any difference. It's not right, not wrong. There is no such thing. But interestingly, with Richard Dawkins, he says, I don't like to live my life based on what I actually believe. So he wrote, I believe this when it comes to evolution and biology. When it comes to my social life and how I live, I would never want to live like this. That's what he wrote. He said, if I lived by what I believed, I would be a fascist and just try to take power over others. So in my social life, I just try to be a good person. And I'm glad he is. I'm glad he's trying to be a good person instead of living like this. Okay, here's one more. And these are assumptions, by the way, that people are saying we can justify human rights apart from the Bible, and the Bible is the thing that is against human rights. But I'm giving you some alternate examples. This is a lot of words on this slide, but read a few of them. This is called The Atheist Guide to Reality. by Alex Rosenborg. Is there a God? No. Of course not. What's the nature of reality? What physics says it is. What's the purpose of the universe? There is none. What's the meaning of life? Ditto. No meaning. Why am I here? Just dumb luck. Does prayer work? Of course not. Is there a soul? Is it immortal? Are you kidding? No, of course it's not. Is there free will? Not a chance. Pay attention to that. We can come back to that later. Someone said something that makes us special as human beings is freedom. If you believe that the world is only material and there is no God, freedom disappears. If you want to talk about that, we can. We'll come back to it. What happens when I die? Nothing. What is the difference between right and wrong, good and bad? There is no moral difference between them. I think that's a tough statement. Is abortion or euthanasia or suicide or paying taxes or foreign aid or anything else that you don't like forbidden, permissible, sometimes obligatory? Anything goes, he says. Now, actually, he's a rational thinker. He's putting together his belief in how the world is, and now he's trying to line that up with how we should act. And this is actually rational from his point of view. This is how the world is. So you could add to that list at the bottom. Is abortion, euthanasia, suicide, paying taxes? What about slavery? Or oppressing another human being? Or racism? Or attacking someone because of their religion? Or attacking someone because they are less able to contribute to society, for example, disabled? And he would say, anything goes. That's pretty heavy, don't you think? I don't like to think of the world like that. But I think he's being rational. So let's get to the Bible, because that's the topic tonight, right? What does the Bible actually say about human rights? Is the Bible the kind of book that justifies oppression, racism, slavery, gender inequality, all these things where people are getting pushed down? Does the Bible justify those things? Well, let me give you a little bit of the basis. Here's my claim for you, is that the Bible represents all human beings as eternally valuable, loved by God, and morally responsible for their decisions regarding how they treat other people. So if that's true, the Bible gives us a good reason for human rights. Let me give you a quote from the Bible. This is at the very beginning. So God created human beings in His image. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them. So, male and female, hey, I know you. Nice to see you. Welcome. He created human beings in His image, giving them ultimate value, regardless of their gender, here in this verse, right? Male and female, created in the image of God. And furthermore, the Bible says that God loves human beings. So here's two more aspects about human rights that the Bible mentions. So you're created in the image of God. That gives me the right to say anyone in any part of the world, regardless of their religion, their status, their race, their ethnicity, their sexual preference, their religion, their background, any of those people are created in the image of God and of ultimate worth. And they are loved by God. So if I'm to oppose them, I'm opposing God. That's pretty heavy, isn't it? Don't you think? And finally, human beings are given a purpose. So that's three things the Bible says about human rights. All humans are created in God's image. All humans are loved by God. And all humans are given a purpose. So I think this establishes the foundation for human rights. So this has a number of interesting consequences. So there are human rights in many, many areas, don't you think? So this is a broad, broad question. And maybe I should pause before I rush on to other areas. Anyone want to jump in with a question or comment on the foundation for human rights here? You want to ask about it? You can be free to do that, if you'd like. We'll have a little bit of time at the end, by the way, for more questions. And I'm willing to stick around after this talk as well, if you want to talk about that. Yeah.
The Bible does mention slavery, though.
It does. You're right. We're going to talk about that. It's coming up. Good. Well, we'll get to that. And there are some complicated passages. I admit that. There's some passages that I have a hard time understanding from our modern perspective. But we'll talk about that a little bit. How about we start with diversity? And then we'll move into some of these other things like slavery, human trafficking, and things like that. Okay? What about diversity? Do you know that currently in our world, the Bible gets accused of being something that's a westernized religion, and we're trying to take over the world from a Western perspective. In my country, it's the white evangelical males that are taking over the Bible and pushing their thoughts on everyone else. Right? Those evil white evangelical males. Right? Is that what the Bible talks about? Is the Bible Western? Is it white? It's actually, I had a student one time say, why did God allow 12 white men to start Christianity? And I thought, none of them were white. What are you talking about? There were no white men at the beginning. There were Middle Easterners and North Africans and Turkish and Asian. There weren't any white men, not until much later. It's kind of an interesting irony. But what does the Bible actually say about diversity? Does anyone have an idea what the Bible says about diversity? We can press on, but I'll show you a few things. Here's a quote. This is from a recent book that I recommend. I'll give you a few titles at the end if you're interested to read the book. Contrary to popular conceptions, the Christian movement was multicultural and multi-ethnic from the outset, from the very beginning. Did you know that the missionary movement of Christianity began with multiple languages? People coming into Jerusalem and hearing the gospel, the story about Jesus Christ, in many different languages, and they went back to their countries with those languages. And so the Christian movement began multi-ethnic. In fact, if you read the story of the Christian movement, within the first few chapters of what's happening in the early Christian church, there's a list of leaders. This is in Acts chapter 13, if some of you are interested to go look it up. And the list of the leaders includes someone from who's Jewish background. There's someone who's Greek background. There's a North African from Alexandria. And there's one from Cyrene. So Simon the Cyrene. So you have several nations. So really you could say you have one from the Turkish area of Asia. So really you had an Asian, you had an African, you had a Middle Easterner in leadership, and possibly one who became a Frank and a European later on. So you have at least 4 or 5 different continents within the first few chapters of the beginning of Christianity. So this is kind of sociological evidence, but what does the Bible actually say about it? So maybe that's just a coincidence that that's how it started. What does it say? Let's take a look. Here are some biblical quotes. The first one is from the very beginning of the Bible, and the last one is from the very end. I would argue that the Bible is multinational and multi-ethnic all the way through. So at the very beginning, in Genesis, God chooses Abraham, one man, and he says, through you, he doesn't say through you, you're going to have the best of everything, it's you and your family, that's it. He says, through you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. All the families of the earth, all the different tribes. And then Jesus, in the middle of the Bible, Jesus said, I want you, his disciples, to go to all the nations. All of them. And make disciples. And then at the very end is a vision of what heaven would be like. And the vision of heaven says, there before me was a great multitude no one could count, from every nation, tongue, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne of God. So this has actually had an impact, of course, on Christianity as a religion. So let me read you one other quote here, and then we'll press on. One of the unique things about Christianity is that it is the only truly worldwide religion. This is from an author named Tim Keller. Over 90% of Muslims live in a band from Southeast Asia to Middle East and Northern Africa. Over 95% of all Hindus are in India and the immediate environment. Some 88% of Buddhists are in East Asia. However, 25% of Christians live in Europe, 25% in Central and South America, 22% in Africa, and probably growing, 15% and growing very fast in Asia, and 12% in North America. It's spread all over the world. So therefore, Professor Richard Bauckham writes, almost certainly Christianity exhibits more cultural diversity than any other religion, and that must say something about it. So let me pause just for a moment and say that there certainly have been abuses of this, haven't there? Within Christianity and within people who believe in God, there's been some abuses for diversity. But let me just draw your attention to the fact that an abuse against what this says does not prove that this is wrong. It just proves that people have used it in a terrible way. Wouldn't you agree? Or perhaps misunderstood it, because this is what it says, all nations. Should we pause for a minute? Question or comment? You want to jump in? We can keep going? Okay. So what about, here we go. Slavery, right? You said the Bible mentions slavery. It does. And I'll just say this, that there have been many abuses in history of slavery. My own country is probably the worst example that I know of, where we had many years of systematic slavery. And you had some people arguing that somehow their religion, Christianity, justified them in doing that. But I would argue that the Bible actually undermines the whole idea of slavery. Owning another human being is not possible to conceptualize with what you are told in the Bible. So if all human beings are made in the image of God, like we talked about at the beginning, all human beings are loved by God, and we're told to respect them as such, and He wants all human beings from many different nations to join Him in heaven, how would it be possible that I could own another human being and abuse them in some way? So there must be some kind of twisted way of thinking. Now we can come back on that because the Bible doesn't immediately outlaw slavery. In fact, there are some passages that are addressed to slaves, and we can talk about that a little bit if you like. But let me give you first the principles, and then we'll come back to that if you want, okay? So what does the Bible actually say about it? I would say that the Bible undermines the whole idea of slavery. And slaves are even told in 1 Corinthians, if you can gain your freedom, do it. You should do that, if it's possible. That's in the New Testament. The abolition of slavery was led by Christians, pastors and theologians. I'll just give you a few names. Like William Wilberforce, of course, you've heard of him, and Harriet Tubman, and Charles Finney. People like that in our country as well. They were Christians, and they believed the Bible. And because they believed these things that we just talked about for human rights, they were able to outlaw slavery in their countries and show that these ideas had already been totally undermined. So what about some of the passages in the Bible that seem to allow slavery? Have some of you heard some of those? Yeah, what are some things that come to mind? Anything comes to mind for you? You want to talk about on these? Yeah?
I think what was discussed yesterday with, I think it's, is it Exodus or Genesis 21:21?
Okay. Exodus, I think. What was it? I missed the discussion on that one. So
21:21. So basically it was sanction of slavery.
Okay.
So like you get up the passage if you want to do that.
Okay. So there are some passages in the Bible that seem to allow for slavery, because there were slaves during that time. So there are commands to slaves, commands about how to treat them and so forth. But let me give you just a couple thoughts on this. The first thought is this. We in our culture have lost the ability, I would argue, to take things in context, to read in context. So the Bible is a full developing story, from Genesis all the way to Revelation. And that one I had up there at the very end of the last slide about the vision of heaven, that's the end of the story. That's where we're going, all the nations together at the throne of God. But the story is developing through the Bible. So in some of these ancient times, you had some customs, and you also had some of the way that the world was at the time. So, just for example, taking things out of context would be like saying, Harry Potter, he was denied into witches' school. He wasn't allowed to go there, to Hogwarts. That's the end, right? Right? No, that's just the first thing in the story. And if I take that out of the story, I miss the whole point. He was denied, and he was told no. But there's more to the story, right? It develops and develops, and then he's allowed in, and then lots of things happen. And then there's 37 books, is it, or something afterwards? there's a lot more information. So if I take one piece from the beginning of the Bible and say, look, this is it, it's similar to doing that in a story. I'm not seeing the whole picture of the story. So one or two other details really quickly. So there are some of these commands in the Old Testament. Let me just tell you what some of them said, though. They are totally unlike our view of what slavery is. They're more like someone getting a job as a servant and agreeing to take the job in order to have housing and food and payment. So this was a protection in ancient times. So there was a lot of this that was going on. In fact, there's a command in the Old Testament, not long after that one, where slaves are to be freed every 7 years. Did you know that? You are not allowed to own someone. They can work for you for 7 years, and after that, you must set them free. That's called the year of Jubilee. And slaves could make a voluntary choice in that system. They could say, this is a good situation, and I'll stay here. This family provides housing and food for me in a good way. I'll stay. That was a voluntary choice. That's called indentured slavery or servitude. Yeah, go ahead.
Was that referring that what the passage you were saying? Was that referring to Jewish slaves or slaves?
In particular, it was referring to Jewish slaves. Yeah. Right.
So that means that those who were Jews would.
Yeah.
Given that opportunity?
Well, I don't know exactly. I think they were, but that's a good question. I don't think technically we have the command to free the others. So, but that's right, and that's part of this developing story. I don't like that part, to be honest. Yeah.
Also, another question. The last point here: abolition of slaves led by Christians.
Yes.
When you're saying that, are you also kind of indirectly claiming that the Christians or the people who were leading this abolition were doing it based on the Bible?
Yes.
Like, were they saying that I believe that what the Bible is saying is wrong, therefore we should free them? Or is it just because they were Christians, because everybody were at that time?
Oh, good question. No, I think they're particularly arguing from the Bible. So, for example, did you see the picture of Martin Luther King giving the speech in the video? Do you know what he was quoting? Let justice roll down like a river. Do you know where that is from? That's from the prophets. Prophet Joel. That's in the Bible. So up through the Bible, justice is the goal. But we have fallen, sinful societies making terrible choices. So some of the commands in the Old Testament are commands to manage a terrible situation. Here's another scenario on that one. In the New Testament, so Roman times, there were so many people that were slaves that it was there's some disagreement on the numbers, but about 40% of the population, and in some cases they thought it was the majority, like tipped up and over. So many people were in this situation. So this wasn't a small group of oppressed people, this was a large population. And so when you think about some of the commands, listen to this verse, and then I'll come back to your question too. So Roman slaves, let's see. Oh yeah, so in the New Testament here in Galatians, the whole idea of power and slavery is inverted. So listen to this verse from Galatians. It says, do not use your freedom for self-indulgence, but serve one another. And that word actually means become slaves to one another, out of respect for God. That's what is commanded in the New Testament. Don't use your freedom to indulge yourself and lord it over another. Instead, become slaves to one another. Serve each other like that, willingly. Did you want to add to that? Yeah.
Clarify something, because
yeah.
you mentioned Martin Luther King, but at that time there weren't any black slaves. I was referring to those other you were talking about.
Yes.
That you mentioned.
Yeah. Sorry, I used him as an example. He was arguing that slavery still existed in a different form.
That's true.
As oppression.
Yes.
Yeah. But you're right. But William Wilberforce, if you read his writings, he's arguing from the principles of the Bible. And he's saying to his fellow Christians, you have it wrong. Look at the Bible. You have it wrong.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I would argue. Yeah. So, okay, let's move on. This is a tough one, and maybe we can talk even more afterwards, because I admit some of these passages are kind of complicated. But I would offer an example to think about. So in the New Testament, these commands to slaves and things that seem like they allow slavery to continue, they invert the power so that a very possible scenario is this. Someone who is a slave, so to speak, and I would say an indentured servant of a family, spends his week working for his boss, living in their home, and then on Sunday they go to church. And because the slave has been a Christian for a long time, the slave is an elder in the church. And the slave is now the authority over his boss in church. And that actually fits with Scripture. I think that happened. And there's one other whole book in the Bible, a small book called Philemon. Anyone ever heard of that book? Okay, so it's a book about a slave who escaped. And again, remember, there's many in the population at this time. This slave has escaped, and Paul, guess what he does? At first you think, no, this sounds oppressive. He sends him back to his owner. No, Paul, are you supporting slavery? Why are you sending him back? But do you know what he says to the owner in the letter? You know? Yeah. Take him back as a brother, not as a slave. He's coming back to you as your brother. Yeah. He's a fellow believer. So I would argue that the whole idea of slavery is inverted. The power structures are inverted, and the idea is undermined so that eventually you cannot even have slavery in the culture. And that's what some of these later theologians like Wilberforce were arguing. It just doesn't make sense. But I think part of the difficulty of this problem is that long developing story. When you have a society, for example, where almost half, up to the majority, is slaves, what if we were to say abolish slavery immediately? Most of those people would die. There weren't jobs. There wasn't an economy. There wasn't a system. The whole system was broken, and I would say the system was wrong. It was wrong to have that kind of a system, but that's the way the world was. And so the commands entered into that broken world. Okay, let's go a little bit more. What about gender inequality? Now we have more hot topics, right? Anybody ready to get into this one? We can have a there's so many topics we could talk about. What does the Bible actually say about gender inequality? Anybody have a thought on this? Again, there's some complicated passages, some difficult things to sort out. Let me just list a few things for you to think about, and we can come back and talk about a few other things as well. I would say the Bible is elevating to women, even in the Old Testament, even in this ancient, broken time, laws elevated women and protected them. Jesus speaks to women, which, by the way, was not acceptable in many cases. He even speaks to foreign women, just by himself. He heals women, he highlights women, and by the way, his first appearance after the resurrection was to women, which is a very inconvenient truth in ancient times. Did you know that? So in Roman times, women were not even allowed to be witnesses in court. So what would Jesus do if he wants the world to know he's raised from the dead? Appear to some prominent men, right? That's not what Jesus does. He appears to women first. So what does the Bible actually say? Sorry, little things showing up on screen. Here's just one passage. So in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, male nor female. You are all one in Jesus Christ. When it comes to value before God, the Bible claims male and female are equal in God's sight. And that is against much of ancient culture and turns it on its head. Now I will say this. I'll add the fact that the Bible does not say that male and female are exactly the same. There are differences. And there are some passages that are difficult to deal with that talk about those differences. But I would say the Bible actually celebrates unity and beauty in diversity. There's differences in function and role, things like that, which sound kind of hard for our ears. But this is unity and beauty in diversity, not sameness. My wife actually sent me a text, which I'm going to quote her on here. She says, status is a social construct social construct that erodes what is good and beautiful about human beings. Isn't that good? It's really good. Status. So when it comes to status, that's what we're all trying to argue here in some of these cases. Do we have status? But status is a social contract that erodes what is good and beautiful about human beings. I think that's good. Let's press on. Get a few other things, and then we'll come back at some of these. I think we have plenty of questions afterwards, don't you think? What about world peace? Is the Bible dangerous for world peace? Does it justify war and oppression in some way? Remember Hitchens at the beginning? He claimed that religion is the cause of all the wars in the history of the world. That's what he said. All war and violence is caused by religion. Now, I would agree that some wars are caused by religion, and there have been some gross abuses of power, even by Christians, of course. Think of the Crusades, for example. That was a terrible abuse. Many people died. But religion is not the cause of war. The Bible is not the cause of war. Something worse is. Something living inside of us, and the Bible claims that it's sin. That we have this propensity toward violence because of sin. So we could get into like a little argument over who has killed more, Christian governments or atheist governments, and we could argue about the numbers. And actually, the numbers are kind of scary. If you think about if religion, for example, was the cause of war, you would expect that countries or big governments that were officially non-religious, then those would be the most peaceful ones. Or officially atheist. Wouldn't you think those would be the most peaceful ones? But if you think about the last 100 years, just in our century, more people have died from non-religious governments. For example, Communist Russia or Communist China, actually. Maoist China, Pol Pot in Cambodia. There's just on and on you can go. But I think it's not really very helpful to talk about who has killed more. Is it millions who have been killed by atheists or hundreds of thousands killed by Christians? That's ridiculous. I think there's something worse inside, and it's sin and our propensity for violence. So what does the Bible actually say about war? Let me give you one quote here you can think about. As far as it depends on you, live at peace with every man, every person, from Romans 12. So I would say truly transformed people who have come to faith in Christ and are living by the Bible, they don't seek war or conquest, but they elevate the needs of others. So the early Christians, do you know what they were complimented for? They weren't complimented for their military strategy. They were complimented by historians, even Roman historians, for the way they gave up their lives, the way they died. So there's one, I was searching for the quote, and I'm sorry I couldn't find it for you, but there's one I remember from my studies, and it said, "The thing I love about you Christians is how you die." And it wasn't just trying to get them down, it was saying you die with peace, and you die with hope, and you die willingly for others. That's not a warlike attitude, is it? Okay, a little bit more. Getting toward the end here. You able to go a little bit more? Hanging on?
Yes.
Okay. What about science and education, scientific inquiry? Is the Bible dangerous for this? Remember Hitchens and Dawkins at the beginning? That's what they're arguing. The Bible shuts down education. Makes you think kind of in a bigoted way that you don't investigate what's in the world anymore. But what does the Bible actually say? Let me give you some history first, actually. The first university systems were begun by Christians to study God. Theology. Did you know that? The first university actually began in Italy, and it was to study theology. And then law and medicine were added to that. Hospitals and medical science for every person, for the normal person, was begun by Christians after Constantine made Christianity legal. Did you know that? The first hospitals, the first medicine was in Greece, of course, before this, but it was only for the military. It was for the elite. It was not for every person. So when we began studying medical science and opening hospitals for every man, it was motivated by the things that we talked about at the beginning. That God has created everyone in His image. God loves them. They deserve a chance to come to hospital. It was begun by Christians. Literacy. There's global campaigns in literacy promoting reading. by Christians all over the world, even today. There are Bible translators, for example, like Wycliffe, who are all over the world helping people learn to read, and in some cases even helping their language be written down for the first time. The scientific method, even, is a Christian achievement. Did you know that? It's based on Christian assumptions that there's a God with a rational order who created a universe that has rational order. The universe is not spiritual, so the universe doesn't make its own decisions. God gave it an order, and He created us with a rational mind in order to see that. So we could go investigate it, and then He went and commanded us to go look. So I would say academic inquiry and the scientific method is motivated by Scripture. Let me give you a couple quotes from the Bible. So what does it actually say? Here you go. Great are the works of the Lord. They are studied by all who delight in them. I think that's kind of a motivating verse for scientific inquiry. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of His hands. So investigating astronomy, this is pursuing understanding God. There are so much more. I'll just give you a little hint here. Think about the names of some of these ones involved in the formation of the scientific method, like Roger Bacon, or Duns Scotus, or Occam, or Etrichor, or Buridan, or Copernicus, Bruno, Mersenne, Wilkins, Oldenburg. All those names I just mentioned, do you know what their profession actually was? Pastors. They were pastors. And those are the ones who are developing the scientific method. Also, Francis Bacon, Kepler, Galileo, Descartes, Newton, Locke, Leibniz, Pascal, Van Leeuwenhoek, Oldenburg, Boyle. Here's a quote from Francis Bacon, who's often called the father of the scientific method. Here's what he wrote about atheism. It is true that a little philosophy inclineth, that means leans you, inclineth one's mind toward atheism. But depth in philosophy brings people's minds back to God, back to religion. Isn't that interesting? That's the founder of the scientific method saying, if you study enough philosophy, you're coming back to God. A little bit you might want to become an atheist. Kind of interesting, isn't it? Okay, but what about this? Is the Bible even accurate? Have you ever played the telephone game? Do you know the game I'm talking about, where I whisper something into Borgild's ear, and she whispers into your ear, and it goes around the room and comes to the back, all the way up here? And then we ask Jim to stand up and say, what was it? We all laugh because it's not the same, right? He says something totally different. And one of you in the middle screwed it up on purpose, probably, and changed some of the things. But is that what happened with the Bible? So it's coming down through the generations to us, and it's getting changed. Translated, adjusted. I mean, for goodness sakes here, it's been 2,000 years, right? Since some of these events happened. It's a long time. So we've had lots of time to play the telephone game, right? Is it kind of like this, where the bridge has been coming to us and then suddenly it falls off? There's a famous scholar who's been claiming this, and his name is Bart Ehrman. Anybody know who that is? Have you heard of him? He makes radical claims. For example, he'll say, there are more variations than there are words in the Bible. And you think, oh no, we could never know what it said. But actually, he's changing the truth. He's not representing reality. And I'll tell you exactly how. Because the next thing he says out of his mouth, I actually went to his presentation in a room about this size, and he said that, and everyone in the audience was totally quiet. Like, we can never know what was originally written in the Bible. And then the next thing he said, of course, I have to admit that 95% of those variations are punctuation and spelling. What? Spelling changes? And then he said, of the remaining 5%, many of these are word order differences, and we have enough manuscripts that you can compare and reasonably find out what the original said. Oh, and of the remaining half of 1%, the passages that are really significantly different, none of those change anything about Christian belief. They're just kind of side passages. I was sitting in the back of the auditorium. I almost stood up and said, Hallelujah! And, you just proved my point, not your point. He was trying to argue the Bible was inaccurate, but he actually proved its accuracy quite well. Let me show you just a comparison here. If you want to find out how accurate an ancient text is, you need a lot of copies to compare from a lot of different places, if possible. You want them to be as close to the time of the events as possible. And then you want to be able to see how accurate they are across that spectrum. So some of these, you can see some of these that you've heard of, like Homer. This is one of the best preserved ancient texts that we have, Homer's Iliad. And we have, it's written in 800 BC, and we have 643 copies. That's a lot. But look, the earliest copies are 400 years after it was written. So they're separated from the events by 400 years. Can you think of anything that happened 400 years ago in your country? It's hard to remember. It's a long time. What? It's a long time ago, 400 years ago? 1600s? So you have to really think hard. So these are separated by 400 years. Look down at Plato. Any philosophy students in the audience? There's one, I know. Any other philosophers? You read Plato? I really enjoyed Plato. Look at Plato's documents. We only have 7 manuscripts from Plato. And they're separated from the time he wrote it by 1,300 years. So are we certain that Plato himself wrote it just like that? We think it's pretty good. It's pretty good. But it's a long separation. So what about the Bible? Anybody know what it looks like for the Bible? Let's take a peek. This is the New Testament, written in 50 to 100 AD. That's the span. The earliest copies that we have come from 114 AD. That's within 50 years. The earliest complete books that we have, full book of the New Testament, come from 200 AD. That's within 100 years. And the earliest full complete collection of the entire New Testament altogether with all the books comes from 325 AD, only 225 years after. And how many copies do we have to compare? 5,366. Now here's the ultimate question after that. What is the accuracy rate? We have all of this data. Does anyone know what the accuracy rate is? From the oldest copies all the way to the newest copies, all the way to a Bible that you could find today in the bookstore. Do you know what the accuracy rate is? You do?
It's the highest in the world.
It's the highest of any ancient document anywhere in the world. It's 99.5% known accuracy. Yeah, isn't that incredible? That's absolutely incredible. So I think we actually have the Bible accurately preserved for us. That doesn't tell us whether or not what's written is true. It just tells us that it's been accurately preserved for us. So let's finish with this. How does the Bible answer the great questions of life? I think this is the thing that really makes it dangerous. So we were talking about, is it dangerous for human trafficking, slavery, gender, these hot topics. We can talk some more after. And there's some difficult issues there. But I think it's actually more dangerous when it comes to personal questions. This, I find, is the most compelling evidence for me that the Bible is actually true. Because the great questions of life are substantially answered. So let me give you some of the questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Why do I struggle with making bad choices, even though I want to make good ones? Is there any hope for me? Who can help? Do I have hope for after death? Here's how the Bible answers those questions. Genesis 1:27, you are created by God. You are loved by God and made in His image, giving you ultimate value in your life, regardless of who you are or how good at things you are or how pretty you think you are, or ugly or handsome or rich. That part doesn't matter. You were created in the image of God, made by Him, loved by Him. But you're also fallen into sin. Romans 3:23 says that all have sinned and fall short of God's glory. So the question, why do I struggle and make bad choices, even though I want to make good ones? I still make bad ones, is actually answered. The philosopher Pascal thought the Bible was the only explanation for the mystery of humankind, who could be so good and so bad at the same time. He said it has to be this answer. So we are created in God's image, but fallen into sin. Is there any hope for us? So the Bible claims, but God demonstrates his love for you in this. While you were still a sinner, Christ died for you. There is hope. He offered to take your payment. And finally, can we have hope for eternity? So I've been studying the Gospel of John with some young students, some 13 and 14-year-olds. And we're looking all through these stories, and there's some really fun stories. But right at the beginning of the Gospel of John, it says this: "Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right," or human rights, he gave the right to become children of God. Receive him and believe in his name. Isn't that interesting? I think the Bible answers the great questions of life more substantially than anything I could think of. Does this come up here? So is it dangerous? Absolutely it is. And let me ask you just one other question. Have you read it for yourself? I would give you a challenge tonight. That this is a question and it's an opportunity for you to do some investigation on your own. Have you picked up the Bible for yourself to read what it says? And to try to gain perspective on this whole story. Not just pick one little thing out and say, oh, it says this. Oh, Harry Potter didn't get in. No. Read the whole story and see what it says for yourself. And come to the story of Jesus in the New Testament. Who was he? What did he do? The Bible makes some very radical claims about the person of Jesus and about itself as a book. It claims to be the truth. It claims to be life-changing. Jesus himself said, "I am the way and the truth and the life." That's a pretty radical claim for any human being to say something like that. Have you investigated that for yourself? I think you're actually going to have an opportunity here. I think there are some groups forming, is that right? Or places where you could go and read it with somebody if you wanted. Maybe that's a way that you could do it. Maybe you came with somebody tonight that you're sitting next to, and you know, they have a Bible. I could borrow theirs. Or maybe they would read it with me and help me think about it a little bit. But I don't want you to go get a bunch of theological perspective from some system. I want you to read the Bible for yourself and see what it says. Do some discovery. Okay, that's all I got. Any questions? Yeah.
I wonder, in one of Paul's letters, he addresses the thing with marriage. It's not relevant for me, but I just read it. And men are to love women as themselves, but women are to, I think it was either fear or respect their men. I think it was respect. And it was the relationship between the church and Jesus. And I'm it seems a little bit weird to me that women are supposed to be under man in the marriage, and it just seems weird.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? It sounds strange to our modern ears, doesn't it? The passage is Ephesians 5, and Paul is speaking to husbands and wives. And he tells wives, submit to your husbands. That's what he says. Ooh, I don't like that word. Do you like that word? It sounds kind of, sounds out of touch with our current reality. But actually the author of this book that I put up here, Rebecca McLaughlin, I put her up for a reason because she actually talked about that passage. She said, I used to be really irritated about that command. And then she said, but then I started focusing on the command to men. And the command to men says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave up his life to die for her. So she thought, what if that was my command? I'm supposed to die for my husband? No, that's not my command. My husband is supposed to die for me. And so she started thinking about it a little bit, that the command to the man was that he give up his rights and honor hers above his, even his own life. That's heavy. And so then if you come back on the command, you think, oh, so this was her conclusion. She said, I look for ways to submit to my husband. Not because I like the idea, not because it's cultural, but because Jesus went to the cross for me, died for me. So I'll look for ways to honor my husband because of that. And her husband, of course, is living out his sacrificial love and honoring her needs above his own. Notice what happens, by the way? All of the power structures are inverted. They don't make sense anymore. If suddenly, yes, you're here, but he's supposed to die for you and elevate your needs, it's turned on its head. So this idea from Galatians 5, if I am to become like a slave to my fellow believers, and I do that out of respect for God. Yeah. There's more on it. We could talk some more. Maybe we talk even more after. Some other questions you want to pursue? Yeah.
I just have a question. I think it's a topic that you haven't spoke about, but I think it's. I really just want to get some insight in terms of what you think about it. Perhaps sometimes in the Bible we can approach different scriptures that seemingly seems have a contradiction in terms of how you kind of interpret the text. For instance, if I take the text of Abraham and Isaac, where Abraham is going to sacrifice his son, it seems like he's having like a child sacrifice, right? And that's like the first approach. You meet them, but you don't get like the whole story. How will you approach such text with the contradiction?
Yeah, great question. So often people say there are many contradictions in the Bible, and usually my answer is, like what? Because there actually aren't many contradictions in the Bible, and I would claim there are no true contradictions. But I would answer your question like this. That command from God to Abraham to sacrifice his son was so strange. Even the philosopher Kierkegaard wrestled with this. Has anyone read Kierkegaard's take on this? He calls it the teleological suspension of the ethical. Ooh, that sounds really big. He's trying to explain what happened here. But that command was a picture of what God would later do with Jesus. Send his son as a sacrifice to the cross. And so this was a picture. Now here's the question. Did God intend for Abraham to act on that? To kill his son?
I don't think so.
Why not?
Because he had better intentions.
Other
intentions.
Well, what happened in the story?
God stopped him.
God stopped him. Yeah. So did God intend for him to do that? No, he didn't. But he wanted to show, this is what it would feel like to sacrifice your son. I will do that. In fact, his son won't willingly. But he didn't intend to kill him. But there is something, this is again part of what I mentioned about reading in context. If you get the whole story, sometimes those contradictions make sense suddenly. I'll give you one example. There's a passage in Proverbs. It says, answer a fool according to his folly, or you'll become like him yourself. Do you know what the next verse says? Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or he will become wise in his own eyes. Like, that's a contradiction. Answer a fool, do not answer a fool. But the point is context. In some cases, I need to recognize, yes, I should answer a fool in a foolish way. And other times, I should say, I'm not going to go into that debate because he's going to feel like he's got something on me. I don't need to go there. It's context. So it's not a true contradiction. Yeah.
But going back to the story that he said, isn't it kind of child abuse to take your son upon, and even though he didn't kill him, it must have been pretty traumatic for him to watch his own father tie him up and about to stab him.
Right. Well, let's go a step further. Isn't it child abuse for God to send Jesus to the cross? That's become actually a popular question. It's a theory going around that God is a child abuser. So if he sends Jesus to the cross, he killed his own kid. That's terrible. I would never kill my kid. Why could God do that? Right? Does anyone have an answer to that? Yeah.
There's a question about how old is Isaac?
Yeah, there is a question.
Because I think he's the grown-up.
Yeah.
And he's probably stronger than his old father.
Yes, his father was over 100 years old when this happened. And the son was...
30 something? 40?
Yeah, could have been. There's debate a little bit, but he was strong. You could say he's at least 18. Can an 18-year-old stop a 100-year-old? Yes, most of the time. That actually applies to the question of God and Jesus. Do you know what the Bible says about Jesus? Here, let me quote it for you. Who, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of God, the Father Almighty. Jesus went to the cross willingly. He wasn't forced. He decided, I will go. So that changes the story. Yeah. Yeah, some other questions you want to pursue? Yeah?
Yeah, I have a friend who is Jewish.
Mm.
And having him as a friend made me realize that the problem of anti-Semitism, which is a growing problem in Europe and probably everywhere.
Yes, it is. Yes.
It was also like it started to make me thinking like what the role of Christianity is here, and also
Yes.
like the Bible.
Mm.
I find it's actually one of the biggest problems for me personally. Like, isn't the Bible there dangerous? Because,
good question. Yeah.
Because there's this idea of the replacement of the Old Covenant by the New Covenant, the Old Testament, New Testament. So there is a certain, you could say, if you are very critical, and theologians have been, and especially Jewish people have been very critical on this, that it is kind of against the Jews, and it has led to
it has led to abuses, even people claiming that justify anti-Semitism.
But the problem is, like, it's the core of our belief of Christianity, of Christian theology, right? The idea of Old and New Testament. So, and I know that there are different theological positions there, but would you answer to this?
Yeah, good question. So here's how I would take that. The Bible actually does not justify anti-Semitism in any way. So that, of course, the founders of Christianity, Jesus himself was Jewish, all of the early leaders of the church were Jewish, the best theologians were Jewish, all the disciples, they were all Jewish. So one step is, if we were to say, we're justifying anti-Semitism and we should be against the Jews, then we're against our own people. We're against Jesus. We're against the Apostle Paul. We're against Peter. We're against all of the writers of the New Testament. They were all Jewish. But beyond that, as you said, we have the New Covenant and the Old Covenant listed in the Bible. Do you know what Paul says about the Jewish people when he's writing? This is in Romans chapter 11. So in chapter 10 and 11, he's talking about, well, what should we do now that our nation is no longer the center? He says, my prayer for my own people is that they would be saved. In fact, I would lay down my life for them. If God wanted to send me to hell to save the Jews, I would say, okay.
But what does that mean, to save the Jews? I mean, that means that they lose their Jewishness then.
Well, Paul would argue they don't lose their Jewishness, they gain a relationship with God. So Paul was a Jewish theologian, and his claim was, what Jesus did was fulfill the whole story of the Jews. Not take it away, fulfill it. So I've met some people who are, they call Messianic Jews, and they didn't stop being Jews. They continued the Jewish traditions, and now they have found new meaning in their religion. Suddenly it's alive for them. Oh, this means this. Oh, that means this. Oh, I have a relationship with God. It's not taking away their Jewishness. In fact, one of the big debates in the church was, how Jewish do you need to be a Christian? That was one of the debates. And it was concluded, like we talked about earlier, you don't have to be Jewish. You can be from anywhere in the world, any place, in order to have a relationship with God because of Jesus. Does that help a little bit? Yeah. But I do think it's been misused, and people have tried to say, well, the Jews are responsible for killing Jesus or something, and so we should attack them. But the reason that we do that kind of thing is not from the Bible. It's because of sin. The reason I oppress another people group, it's because I have sin in my life. It's wrong to do that. So when Christians began, in fact, anti-Semitism in Christianity, we don't have to talk all night about this, but it began quite early. Like even before some of the medieval times, there were some early church fathers. But they were wrong. They were doing what was sinful. They weren't following the Bible, actually. Yeah, some other, in fact, I'll throw one more log on the fire. Many of the people who defended the Jews during the Holocaust, most of the big defenders of the Jews were people who believed in the Bible. Christians who believed in the Bible. And they said, no. We should not do that. Protect them, save them, get them out. So that, I think that's the evidence. Yeah. Some different questions? You have one, Georg, you have one?
Yes, Paul wrote that God put statesmen and governments in position, and that was by God's will.
Yeah.
And how do we reconcile that with the Bible's overall message of love and compassion, considering some of the terrible governments and state leaders that have been in place and in power the last 150 years?
Great question.
Germany, Soviet Union, Cambodia, lots of African countries.
United States.
Many places.
Are you thinking like
and also
I'm thinking
of the war, for example. How do we reconcile that?
Yeah, great question. The only thing I can say to that is I don't understand the eternal perspective of God. The Bible does claim that God puts one up and puts down another, and he allows governments to come into control. And actually, when Paul wrote the passage about submitting to government authority, he was writing about Rome. And these were the ones that were killing Christians for sport. Nero, he lit Christians on fire to keep his parties lit up with dead bodies on fire. It's terrible, terrible things. And Paul was saying about that government, God put these governments in place, and they're in charge. We should submit to their rules, unless they tell us to break our rules with God. Then we don't. For example, the Holocaust. These Christians said, I should submit to my government, but if they do that, I'm not going to do that. That's against God's will. Yeah. But I can't answer why. I can only say, in God's eternal perspective, I think he has a reason. I don't know what it is. But it also doesn't justify me supporting a terrible government. I can't say, well, God put them in place, so I should be so on board and happy that they're in charge. I don't have to do that. I vote my conscience. Yeah. Another one? One more? Two more? Yeah.
What does the Bible say about gender and sexuality diversity?
Yeah, well, I've got to go now. We're out of time. Thanks for coming. Oh boy, yeah, that's a big question. It's a big question. But I will say one thing, that the slide we had up here, that the Bible celebrates beauty and unity in diversity. So that the Bible does claim that human beings were created male and female. That's different. So it wasn't something where everyone is the same and we can decide and come in and out. And those are hard words to hear in our culture right now. But I'll say one other thing about this, that the Bible recommends how we treat people that we disagree with. We treat them with gentleness and with respect. Those are key words. That's from 1 Peter 3. Gentleness and respect. So what if I disagree with somebody on what this biological... In fact, last night, there was a medical conference in the house I was staying in on this topic. And doctors were talking about that science says one thing, but social morality now says something different. And the doctor who was leading the meeting was all doctors of all different specialties, and they were discussing gender and identity and all the problems. And the doctor made the claim up front, if you take science and put it over here, morality and put it over here, then you can do like some of these guys, and anything goes. You can make whatever decision you want on these things. But if they go together and there's some connection, then it's different. But there's so much more to say on that one. That's a difficult question. How about we take that afterwards? interested. Yeah. One more? Yeah. How about you first and then you? We'll take two more. Go ahead.
Me?
Yeah. Is that okay?
Can a person be born as a homosexual?
Yeah.
And if yes, does it depend on you following Jesus? And is that enough? And just you not, okay, I'm homosexual, I will be together with, like, if I was a man, or I would be with a man.
Yeah, again, this is a very big question, and let's see if I can say something short about it. I'm not an expert, so I'm not a biologist, but I think it's possible. People could be born with a propensity for many different things. It could be possible that they're born with a propensity to like the same gender, to be attracted to. In fact, the author of the book I put up here, I'll put it up here. I think I have a slide. See this book, Confronting Christianity? She says she was born that way. She was born with an attraction to females. But she actually made a very interesting claim in this book. She said that the human sexual relationship is not the ultimate in the Bible. The ultimate thing about your identity is that you're made in the image of God. And human sexual relationships are not supposed to satisfy completely. They're supposed to be a picture of what it means to relate to God. And so they're always ultimately less than satisfying. So she decided she would do what God, or she would follow what's written in the Bible, which was not get into a lesbian or homosexual relationship. And she's now married to a man. And she has actually quite a bit to write on it. If you're interested to read her story, I would say pick up that book. It's very interesting. Confronting Christianity. It's worth reading on that topic. I wish I could say more, but not an expert. That's a beginning. Did you want to add yours?
Yeah, I was supposed to ask a big question too, but I'll take something smaller. In 1 Corinthians 14, when Paul talks about the silence of the women in the church, I've heard some say, and it's more like a clarification question, like one of the arguments against the saying of Paul that the women should be silent is that in the text, in the Greek text, what Paul wrote, there was like this small kind of symbol that meant like a form of sarcasm, or like women should be silent, and then it's basically that's humbug. Like, is that true, or?
Well, that's hard to say. When you have printed text, it's hard to say if somebody's saying something sarcastic. I would say that's an interpretive angle. But I will say one large thing on this topic. Whatever those commands are about, they are not about value or identity. They could be about role and function. In fact, Christians disagree on what those roles and functions are. But status, like my wife sent me the text about status erodes what it means to be human. Status and function are not the same as identity. That's our culture that says that. I'll give you one quick example. Our culture says that the CEO is more important than the employee, right? The president is more important than the vice president, right? That's what we say. But let me give you an analogy. I'm a basketball coach. I love playing basketball. I coach my sons in basketball. And one of my favorite teams was the Chicago Bulls when Michael Jordan was playing for the Chicago Bulls. And the coach of that team was Phil Jackson. He's a legendary coach. He's all these national championships and things. But the coach, Phil Jackson, had a higher role on the team than Michael Jordan, the star player. But my question to you is, which one of those people is more valuable? The coach or Michael Jordan? What do you think?
Neither.
Yeah, I agree. Neither. They're a team. But one has a function of the coach telling him what to do. In that case, you should go over here and do like this. Okay, he runs out. But the star player, he's the one who wins the game. If he's not on the floor, they're not going to win. But if the coach isn't directing the game, they're not going to win either. In fact, that was true of the Chicago Bulls. Before Phil Jackson came as the coach, they lost so many games, even though they had a star player. So my point is, that's an example from the real world where status and position is not the same as value or identity. And I would say that's true of the Bible. One other example from the Bible, Jesus says to God, I submit to you. Whatever you want me to do, I'll do. As Christians, we believe that Jesus is God. He has the same value. But he says to God, I submit to you.
Okay, I think we...
End with that? Okay.
That was a really good ending. It was. And
Okay.
Can we give...
I don't know about you, but I have a lot to think about that. Yeah, so as Darrell mentioned, there will be a possibility to continue the conversation. So we'll just find a table in the cafeteria. So whoever wants to join that can just go there and find Darrell. Now you've all seen him, so I think you'll be able to find him again. And then there will be, he's told us that he can stay as long as we like him to. So yeah, you'll have plenty of time. So I would like to just invite you also to think about what Darrell said about the Bible part. So we have something for you, and we want to invite you to discuss some of the text in the Bible with us. So this is not like a geeky Christian thing. We prefer that there were so many Christians there. That would be what we prefer. That we have a lot of mixed backgrounds, and we can discuss actually the Gospel of John. And that's interesting, I think. That the Gospel of John means the good news of John, and not just news, but good news. Okay. This is how it could look like. Hanging out in a living room in one of the apartments, and then talk about the big questions. So we have people here tonight that has been a part of this sort of group for a year now, and it's exciting to hear all the different perspectives. So if you would like to join, if you would like to check out for yourself what's the thing going on with Jesus, what does he actually claim, and check it out for yourself. To be informed from the Bible, and not just whatever you hear from a Christian family or very eager friends or whatever. Check it out for yourself. And so this is our invitation. If you would like to start off with someone, to read the Bible with someone, we have 6 stories that we would like to take a look at to start off with. And it starts next week. So we would encourage you to just give us your full name and your phone number, either on your feedback card in front of you, or you can send a text message to this number, and we'll get in touch. So if you're not sure but you would like more information, just write it in the text, and then we'll contact you. So I know we don't like to commit to things, so this is just like, okay, if you're interested in more, you can check it out. Tomorrow, there will be a different seminar here. It will be in Norwegian. Ben David Nordman, he will talk about a world without God. How would that world look like? So he's an astrophysical something fancy. So he's a scientist, I think. And he works at the University of Stavanger. He's a great communicator. He's won Skepsisuken Grand Prix 2018. Yes, putting it into something good. So I would recommend you to come back here, same place, same time, different you're welcome to continue our conversation. We can discuss this later. There are waffles, I think you can smell it. So welcome to join more conversation with Darrell. And enjoy yourself. Thank you for coming.